Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week we are talking about mindfulness. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Education Coordinator at the Victim Service Center. With me today I have Jordan Steckler. Jordan uses she, her pronouns and is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. She earned her master's in clinical mental health counseling from the University of Central Florida. Jordan currently works with adolescents and adults on a variety of concerns, including depression, anxiety, stress, trauma, and grief. Jordan is also a 200-hour certified yoga teacher. So Jordan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And I also have returning Orialis Sosa. Orialis uses she, her pronouns and is a registered mental health counselor intern in the state of Florida. She earned her master's in clinical mental health counseling from the University of Central Florida as well. Orialis's background consists of providing counseling and victim advocacy support to survivors of crime and trauma. In her current role, she provides counseling support to high school students. So Orialis, thank you so much for joining us once again on the podcast. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Emilie. I'm really excited to be here with both of you. So yay.
I'm really excited to have this conversation too with both of you. And as a really brief introduction, mindfulness as a term has been used a lot lately within pop culture. And the term has nearly 24 million tags on Instagram, actually. So according to some small studies by Harvard, mindfulness can help both physical and mental health, including lowering of blood pressure and helping things like irritable bowel syndrome, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So today, we're going to explore what mindfulness is, how people can practice it, the connection between mindfulness and yoga, and how it can help survivors of trauma specifically. So with that, I tend to like starting out my podcast with some definitions. So how would you personally define mindfulness?
Yeah, I think maybe just for us to kind of start off, more of like the classic definition of it is usually about just being aware in the moment. And taking like a non-judgmental stance. So bringing our awareness and being compassionate and non-judgmental with that.
Yeah, the way I explain it to my clients is awareness and just paying attention on purpose. So I try to keep it like really simple so it doesn't seem like this weird, unobtainable goal.
Yeah, I think mindfulness can kind of be a scary idea sometimes of like pressure. And I heard the term I heard you use the word non-judgmental, which seems to be a really important piece of it. And again, mindfulness is used a lot. So are there any misconceptions about mindfulness that you'd like to address?
Yeah, I think a few that kind of come right off the bat. I think for a lot of people, when they think about mindfulness, you sort of get this image of somebody like meditating and maybe you get an image of being very like relaxed and calm and happy. And, not to say that sometimes that's not an experience that you can get from mindfulness, but a lot of times when we're practicing mindfulness, it can actually be an uncomfortable experience because, again, we're bringing that present moment awareness to things that usually, right, we may try to avoid or we may not want to put our attention to. So sometimes, folks may think that they're doing, right, the practicing correctly because it's like, oh, I'm doing this and I don't feel, happy and relaxed and blissful. I feel kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. A misconception is mindfulness is like, oh, I must be serene and my mind must be blank, and maybe I look like Orialis said, like I'm meditating and everything's fine. When really it is more, it's awareness. And it could be awareness of, oh, I feel really calm right now, but it could also be awareness of my heart's racing, my stomach feels kind of weird. My legs are tense. So it is an uncomfortable experience, and it can bring so much information to you about like what you really need and how you can help yourself better.
Right. Yeah. I guess another one that I can kind of think about too is like, I get this a lot, with my clients when they're practicing of, sometimes you feel frustrated because you also think that when you're being mindful, and I think, again, this is when people confuse like mindfulness with meditation of they might think that when you're being mindful, your mind is supposed to be totally blank, no thoughts,
Hmm.
totally calm. But we know that, well, that's not necessarily how the brain works. The brain is always going to have thoughts and different things are going to come up. And it's more of our job of just noticing, being aware of it. If we're going into it with that, perception that our brain is supposed to be totally blank, we may want to start playing whack-a-mole, with our thoughts that come up. And that's going to generate, more anxiety and, make the practice more difficult as well, if that's the perspective we're going into it with.
Exactly. And I think that's where the non-judgment definitely comes in of like non-judgmentally noticing like, hey, I am having thoughts right now. Let's just notice where they're going. Or I am having a lot of feelings right now. Like, let's name them. That's awareness. That's mindfulness.
That makes a lot of sense, and I do appreciate the image of whack-a-mole because I think there is this kind of judgmental of, oh no, my mind is kind of going a different place. Let me bring it back. And there's this idea that yes, we have to kind of have this serene, calm, empty mind, like you were talking about. So yeah, I love that you both broke that down really, really well. I wanted to also kind of going off of that, is there a difference between mindfulness from a mental health perspective and the way mindfulness is referenced on social media and other things like that?
I think kind of like what we were saying, like mindfulness on social media is shown. What I've seen is like people meditating, or I can't think of other examples, but just kind of portraying that serene, everything's fine, I feel only calmness, versus in mental health, it's like, well, you could be feeling anything right now. Let's just notice it, observe it, let's name it.
Yeah, like maybe, yeah, I guess I hear what you're saying of like, sometimes it is portrayed as this like vehicle towards complete and total, goal, happiness as like the goal. Where mindfulness is not so much like goal oriented of like, you're going to do this and now you're always going to be blissful. You're always going to be happy all of the time, but that's definitely the way that it is portrayed, in social media.
Yeah, exactly. Like happiness is like your final destination instead of happiness is a feeling that comes and goes like every other emotion and sensation we experience.
That is a really, really important point, I think. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think a lot of times, yeah, we have this like almost like, with meditation, there's that nirvana, right? That's what the goal is, the ultimate,
Hmm.
you know, at the end. But it makes sense that, if we look at things like emotions as things that come and go, that is a much more realistic way to look at it, I think. And then it does kind of take that pressure off too of, mindfulness and practicing it, which kind of leads me to my next kind of question here, because someone who is listening might be thinking, I'm a beginner and thinking about sitting still for 30 minutes of mindfulness makes me feel overwhelmed, or I also don't have 30 minutes a day to practice. What can I do? So I wanted to ask, have you heard this from any of your clients before when you bring up things like mindfulness?
Yes, 100%.
Yes.
So going off of that, what are some things that you kind of recommend for beginners, some small mindfulness exercises, especially for someone who's busy or who might be kind of nervous to dive into it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember a training where I think Jordan was there with me, where they talked about doing mindfulness like with your eyes wide open. Because a lot of times we think of like mindfulness as, just this like very structured activity that we're going to do for 30 days or 30 days, 30 minutes, out of our day each day, when, it's more about like, how can we just incorporate being mindful in our kind of like everyday, life, just being a little bit more mindful. And yeah, for a lot of people, for me as well, like sitting down for, 15 minutes sometimes can feel overwhelming, because think about in your life, how often do you actually just sit down and just kind of be and do nothing? I know for most of us, like even when we have a moment to ourselves, like we're on our phone, we're distracting with something. So I would say just little ways of, starting, even just practicing, like checking in with yourself, throughout the day, however that works for you, even if you just set a little alarm on your phone and, every day around 12 p.m. or, that you're going to stop and just be like, how am I doing right now? Is my jaw tense? How are my shoulders feeling? 0 to 10, like how anxious am I right now? I think even just adding that, of just noticing where you're at in the middle of the day can be one little way of being more mindful during your everyday life.
Yeah, I love all of those suggestions. Like, I love encouraging my clients to set reminders on their phones. And then I'll take that kind of maybe another step or just different direction. Other activities I do with my clients are kind of related to the eyes wide open Orialis had mentioned, which is like using your five senses. Just kind of look around and what do you see? What do you hear? What can you physically feel against your skin, like your clothes or your seat or the earth beneath you? And then taste and smell, I'll either have them do imaginary taste and smell, or if they happen to have food with them, I'll have them use that. So that's a really helpful one. And I explain you don't have to, that's not the full activity. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Pick your favorite sense and do that one. And then there's mindful eating, even like really trying to find a moment during the day to kind of pay attention and be aware. Just kind of pay attention to what you're eating and the flavors and the texture. That's a really great one. Or a body scan, kind of again related to what Orialis had said, like checking in, what are you feeling? So maybe if emotions are really hard to name and identify, notice what physical sensations you're feeling right now.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about body scans. So I love that you both are bringing up not only, thinking about emotions and kind of checking in that way, but it also sounds like you can check in physically too. How am I feeling physically right here? And also checking in around you and your surroundings, just bringing you completely into the present. Orialis, did you have something you wanted to jump in on?
No, I mean, I was just gonna, kind of further explain that of, we live so much of our lives either, caught up in worrying about what's happening in the future, right? Like maybe nervous, worrying about that. Or a lot of times we live a lot of our day actually in things that have already happened in the past, kind of ruminating or going over, things that maybe we said, an embarrassing comment, we made like 5 years ago, right? And so really with mindfulness, it's all about, just in every way, bringing yourself to this present moment. And again, it can be something big, like a 20-minute, practice, but it can be as simple as like what Jordan is saying is when you're eating something, just really, put down your phone, don't have any music on, and just really focus on what it feels like to eat that. Or if you're, I think one of the classics is like brushing your teeth. Just usually when I'm brushing my teeth, I'm kind of like going through the laundry list of everything that I have to do for that day. But, try it out one time. Just think about like, what does like the toothpaste taste like and how does the toothbrush feel? Just bringing that awareness to that very moment.
Very cool. And I would also, it's kind of reminding me of, I took a class while doing my undergrad at the University of Illinois. We actually did a mindfulness technique together, a practice, I should say, where we all had a raisin and we just had the raisin in our mouth and we just thought of like, what are the textures, what are the flavors, and then at the end we did end up like eating it and then thinking of like chewing and all those things. So I think that that would be kind of an interesting way to start too, of just physically just thinking about the raisin. It's kind of, again, a non-judgmental way to do it too. It just made me think of that. I also wanted to ask if you had, are there any safety concerns like physical, emotional, or otherwise that people should be aware of if they want to get into mindfulness that you wanted to sort of address at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone, particularly when I'm also thinking about people who've been through trauma, sometimes focusing on the body can be triggering. For some folks, when they maybe try to do a meditation or a mindfulness exercise, a lot of times we ask them to focus on the breath. I think that's the classic, is like take deep breaths, right? Mm-hmm. But again, that is something that can be triggering for someone. Those are the two, I think, big triggers that come up, for me that I think about.
Yeah, also closing your eyes.
Yeah, closing your eyes as well, can also be triggering because it can be something where you may feel, trapped or unsafe. It could just, trigger some of those old emotions that may have, come up during that event. So just doing some modifications, like, Jordan's talking about, like, open your eyes, right? If closing your eyes is something that's very uncomfortable, practice it with your eyes open. If, focusing on the breath is something that feels unsafe and is, triggering and overwhelming, practice doing like a walking practice where you're taking steps and you're focusing on, the feeling of each step on the ground. So just, again, working with a counselor, and kind of processing as you go, because again, some of these things you may not even realize until you do the practice, but always knowing that you can modify anything, modify any practice to what's going to work for you.
I love that. Anything else you want to add to that, Jordan?
Kind of going off the last thing Orialis said, I think a really big piece that maybe isn't talked about a lot is like giving your counselor feedback. So like doing this, talking about mindfulness in the context of counseling, like working with a therapist, it's so important to let them know like, hey, I feel unsafe right now, or this activity, it's bringing up something for me, even if the word triggered isn't coming to mind. But like just something is uncomfortable, it's so important to let them know so that they can help you to find a different one so that you are able to like self-soothe and be mindful.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that sometimes that can be hard for someone to give feedback to therapists, but from what I understand, that's really what they're there for, to help make you feel safe. And it's always encouraged to kind of, as we go through, whatever journey that we're going through, as we keep learning about ourselves and discovering through mindfulness, it sounds like you'll be discovering a lot about yourself too. It's always good to kind of reset some boundaries and also kind of communicate to people who are there to help us keep safe and feeling safe. And if you're ever not feeling safe, it's really important that we communicate that. I wanted to ask, now that we talked kind of how to, for a beginner to kind of start delving into mindfulness, what are some longer exercises that you would recommend for people who want to do kind of a deeper dive? Maybe they've already started their mindfulness journey. What are some other longer exercises that you would recommend?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind is progressive muscle relaxation, but that one can honestly be modified to be really short or really long. And that one is kind of going, so the longer version is like going through your whole body and like starting at your head, like squeezing like your face muscles, like tensing them really tight on your inhale, and then exhaling, letting it go. And you do that throughout each muscle group. But a shorter version could be just squeeze your fists and let them go.
I love that you can modify it. I feel like, and we'll talk a little bit more about yoga, but I feel like I'm already kind of in a yoga class in that sense where it's like, and if this is more comfortable for you, do it this way. So I love that you're able to modify these too. Orialis, did you have some longer exercises that you've worked with clients or suggested?
Yeah, I thought of one, but I also love that Jordan brought up the progressive muscle because that's one of my my absolute favorites. Only because like I think that so many of us, myself included, we walk around the day not realizing like how tense we are, or kind of everything that's piling up. And I know like for me, something that I've struggled with is like chronic headaches, and a lot of times it's not realizing that stress piling up, like my jaw is starting to tense throughout the day. So that one for me in particular has been so helpful with even like recognizing the difference between like a relaxed jaw and a tense jaw, and kind of just being able to notice it a little bit more in the moment. So I'm so happy you brought that one up. The one that I thought about is doing like an urge surfing with emotions. So again, a lot of what we've been talking about, a lot of the practices we've been talking about have been a little bit more on like the relaxed, kind of noticing like pleasant, or neutral stimulus, like brushing your teeth and things like that. But with the urge surfing is just bringing your attention to maybe like a difficult emotion that's coming up for you. I think for a lot of us, like when you feel something uncomfortable, like maybe, for example, I want to think of like maybe a way that like I've done it, that I've used it before. Maybe like before, okay, so with presentation, something for me that's always been really difficult for me is doing presentations. Before, when I would think about doing a presentation, just like the fear, the anxiety that would come up would feel so overwhelming. For me, right, like what helped me would be, okay, somebody asked me to do a presentation, I'm just going to decline. I'm going to say no, because that's going to help my anxiety go away, right? But what happened, like there was a part of me that did actually want to like grow this part of me of doing presentations and of, doing some more education. And so that meant that I had to get more comfortable, right, in sitting with that discomfort, or sitting with that anxiety. So even being able to like, when the anxiety comes up, just notice it of like, wow, okay, like I'm feeling really scared right now. Okay, like my heart rate is going up. My brain is telling me that like I can't do this, that, that it's going to go awful, right? But being able to notice that, and then being able to like change your reaction to it. So instead of like, okay, the safest thing for me to do is I'm just going to say no, I'm going to decline. That's going to help my anxiety go away. Is, okay, I notice that I feel anxious. I notice that I feel scared, and right, I'm not in danger right now, right? I'm just nervous. I'm going to do this anyway. So again, just being able to sit with and bring our attention to our experience, our emotions, but instead of like reacting to it, we kind of are able to like sit with it and choose a different response. I hope that I did a good job of explaining that. I don't know if Jordan, you have anything to add with that.
Yeah, I was honestly nodding along the whole time you were talking about it. Like it sounded like I just totally agree and love how you said it. I would only add, just because I love talking about this, not because you needed anything added to. It's just kind of saying, or I want to say is like you're really improving your ability to discern between like a threat, which is what your brain is constantly looking for, versus discomfort. And our brains do not like gray. Our brains love black and white. Like I'm safe or I'm unsafe. This is a threat. This is not a threat. So like the example of a presentation, our brains are like, what is this? It's kind of scanning, detecting. We're feeling physical sensations rise up, and our brain's like, I feel uncomfortable, so I must be unsafe. But uncomfortable is not the same as unsafe. And we have to kind of, like Oriala said, like sit in that, which is really, really uncomfortable, but sit in it and recognize the things that are coming up, the thoughts that are coming up, the emotions coming up, the physical sensations, maybe beliefs about ourselves that like are funneling all this stuff, and realize and remind ourselves like, I'm not in danger. I'm recognizing fight or flight is being activated, but I'm not actually in danger. What do I actually want to do about this? Do I want to be like Orialis said, do I want to grow, take a chance? We're kind of we're increasing our ability to sit with it. Yeah, tolerance. And then like responding instead of reacting. So the reaction would be like, oh, nope, I want to feel better right away, so I'm not doing this, like immediate gratification, versus I'm going to sit, I'm going to wait, I'm going to feel, and then respond, which could be saying, yeah, I will take this opportunity.
Yeah. And I would definitely say that, with doing urge surfing, I was just learning to kind of like sit, observe, describe, the emotional sensations that are coming up, especially if you're wanting to do that through processing like sensations and thoughts about trauma. I would definitely recommend with that one, working with a counselor. And I think overall, just with everything of, being patient with yourself, and taking time. Especially when we're dealing with the traumatic stuff, with the trauma emotions and such, like having somebody with you that, can help you like, take a pause and reground and orient yourself and then keep going. I would definitely recommend that.
And increasing your tolerance, your ability to sit in that and not react, that right there is amazing growth. Even if you do, like sticking with this example, even if you do decide like, you know what, I'm not going to present, but you sat in that for a little bit longer before making that decision. And that's like huge incremental growth.
I love that. The word that's coming to mind is like acknowledgement. Just acknowledging how you're feeling, your body's response to it. And I love that you brought up kind of this idea of, the difference between feeling unsafe and our bodies are kind of telling us, oh my gosh, there's a threat, but there really isn't like a physical threat of our safety, which is important to kind of acknowledge the difference, but it's really hard to do that. And I love that you used that example, Orialis. I think it's a really relatable one. And I just want to say I appreciate you being on the podcast, even though it could be stressful to do it. But I really appreciate you being here and, talking about this. I think it really was a great example and really relatable. And the idea that you brought up too, Jordan, of, that doesn't mean that you have to dive into like a presentation and this is the only way to grow, that you can also have like incremental growth too. I love that idea as well. Kind of going off of that flight or fight response that we have been mentioning, how can mindfulness actually help survivors of trauma?
There's so many ways, I feel like. So I'll maybe talk about a few and Jordan can add. But I already think about, what Jordan has already kind of mentioned throughout of, again, when somebody goes through a traumatic experience, oftentimes that's like the scariest thing. They've experienced the scariest thing that anybody can go through. In your body's natural, right, that fight, flight, freeze response, that natural survival mechanism, it is activated. And a lot of times, I think we've talked about this in like other podcasts here of, what happens is that switch kind of stays like turned on or just starts to get dysregulated where, now throughout your day, right, maybe things that in the past would not have gotten a reaction from you, now that is a trigger. Or again, something that might remind you of, the event, is a trigger. So what's happening is that throughout our day, we are, again, our body believes that trauma is happening over and over again. Like we're still stuck in that. And so at the very simplest, it's just being able to recognize, that we are stuck in those reactions, right? Becoming more aware of what are our triggers, what are the things that set us off, becoming more aware of, the warning signs, right? So that we can catch these things a little bit more in advance and helping us become more aware of the present moment of, again, maybe this thing reminded me of that trauma, or maybe this, anxiety that I'm feeling right now is uncomfortable, right? but it doesn't mean that the trauma is happening again. It doesn't mean that I'm unsafe, I'm uncomfortable. So I think that kind of the overarching is that. And then there's so many other ways, but I'll let Jordan add anything.
Yeah, do we need to define fight, flight, or freeze? I'm sure it's been talked about before, but I'm not sure if it needs to be redefined.
Feel free to redefine it. Absolutely. I think that's a really good thing to bring up.
So something happens, some possible threat or some trigger happens, the brain detects it and, it kind of freaks out. And it's like, what do I do? This feels very unsafe. And it happens pretty quickly. And we naturally will dive into one of these kind of reactions. So fight is from evolution, fight was literally like attack, fight somebody, and now it could be get into an argument, get into a physical fight, get into a texting argument with somebody, engage with somebody on social media, like on the comments. It's attack, and it's like a very approach. It's a come forward approach versus flight, which is like run away, hide, avoid. And then there's freeze, where you feel like stuck, your brain might go blank, you're not sure what to do. And our brains just make that decision like instantaneously. It happens like automatically without us making a decision about it.
I really appreciate that you brought up an example of fight in the modern world, because a lot of times when I do think of fight, flight, or freeze, and I talk a lot about it in my trainings, I do think of physically fighting, but you're so right. Mm-hmm. There is also like fighting through text or arguments, and that like kind of blew my mind, because I didn't even think of those kind of responses. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
I think it's also about, after trauma, we're living in very self-protective, kind of mode, like survival mode. So again, there may be a lot of things that are impacted that because of the overwhelming feelings that we're going through, we may be struggling with PTSD or depression or anything like that, or just fear and anxiety. There may be a lot of things that we start to avoid right now. Potentially, relationships are really scary, right? And so in order to protect ourselves, we may, avoid people that we care about, or avoid forming new relationships. Potentially being in public, is really scary. So, how many impacts is that going to have, right? So it's about, we're living in the self-protective mode. And again, with mindfulness, it's becoming more aware of these, these reactions, but then being able to actually like choose, right? It's kind of getting a little bit of that control, some of that agency back of, okay, I'm scared, I'm nervous, all these things. And how do I want to respond to this situation, right? In a way that is going to align with my values, in a way that's going to move me closer to, the kind of life that I want to live. And a lot of that is just about, again, sort of strengthening that muscle for attention and for choice.
I love that you brought in choice. And yeah, it really is about like increasing our tolerance to uncomfortable situations and reminding our brains I'm not in danger. It does give us choice. Like, do I want to go with my immediate reaction, which there's no shame in? It's totally based on self-protection, and it's coming from a really important place of we're in survival, versus, do I want to redirect my life? Do I want to do things differently?
Yeah. I love that you're bringing that up, Jordan, of like not judging yourself for wherever you are, like in your particular journey, because we can be talking about this, and even talking about it can make it sound, it sounds really simple, right? When you talk about it, but in reality, these practices are, they're difficult. These are lifelong practices. Again, we're never going to reach a point where like we have it, completely down. So remember that with mindfulness, it is about being non-judgmental, also of, again, just wherever you are, whatever your comfort level is right now, just noticing that and accepting that.
Yeah, and there's a reason for it. There's a reason that our tolerance could be really low right now. for really painful, awkward situations. There's a reason, and it goes back to that protection piece.
Yeah, I think bringing in that non-judgmental lens is so, so important. And speaking of journeys, you did talk a little bit, you brought that up, Orialis. I wanted to ask, we talk a lot about the healing journey for survivors of trauma. So I wanted to just kind of ask, when would it be useful to bring in mindfulness during someone's healing journey, in your opinion?
Yeah, I would say, I guess when I think about when I was working with survivors who had just gone through, a traumatic event, again, at that moment, the situation just happened. We're sort of still in that crisis, mode. And probably what I would start working with them on would be more of grounding, which is what Jordan was explaining earlier, of using our senses to orient us and bring us back to the present moment. So I think at the beginning, working with, a professional, working with a counselor, that may be an accessible way to start. If maybe you're a little nervous about focusing on the body at first, start by orienting yourself to the things around you. That was a really big one that I, would use with my clients at the beginning. And then from there, it's just going to be, there's no recipe, it's really going to be a conversation between you and your counselor, again, of maybe taking a couple steps forward and practicing something new. And sometimes you may take a little step back, or you may take a little pause and, need to sort of like reground and reorient, and then you can keep going. But I would say an accessible way would be doing the grounding at the beginning, and then having a conversation with your counselor.
Definitely. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Jordan, did you have something you wanted to jump in on?
I think just I totally agree. Like grounding, bringing yourself into the present moment. Like Orialis said, maybe it's like your eyes wide open. It's the using the five senses activity, not bringing attention to your body right away. Like not closing your eyes, just being present it could be more helpful than bringing attention to what's happening inside right away.
Yeah, it sounds like with most things that we talk about on this podcast, it's completely individual, and it really depends on kind of where you're at, and once again, in a non-judgmental way, right? What works for you and what doesn't, and also kind of sitting with the growth aspect of the uncomfortable aspect as well. Not sitting in your comfort zone too much, but growing just a little bit, perhaps like with a therapist in a safe place. We were talking a lot about trauma and some of the reactions that people can have with it. I also wanted to bring up this term disassociation. So first of all, what is disassociation? And can mindfulness help with this?
Jordan was talking about the fight, flight, and freeze response earlier. So I would definitely say disassociation is a part of that freeze response. Again, like what we've been saying, it's a self-protective technique. When something is very overwhelming for a person, they may go into that freeze response where they disconnect from the situation. And disassociation is going to it's on a continuum, so on one end of the spectrum, it might look like, if you've ever had experience of like driving and you sort of get lost in your thoughts and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, here's my exit. How did I even get here? So it can be something like that. And then all the way to the other side where, there's the dissociative identity disorder, or where people may feel disconnected from themselves or disconnected from their surroundings. Again, with mindfulness, I would say some ways that it can be helpful is, helping folks start to notice their warning signs, right? Start to notice their triggers that may lead to dissociation, and slowly building up, that tolerance, for discomfort or for different emotions or different things that may be triggers. I would say that's kind of a simpler way of saying of how it may be helpful. for that process.
Yeah, yeah. Dissociation is kind of the opposite of mindfulness. I kind of think like not being present,
Mm-hmm.
not being aware. So mindfulness is like adding it back in. Like first it's, oh, I'm realizing I'm not present right now. Could be a good place to start. And then,
Mm-hmm.
what happens, like Orialis said, it totally relates to freeze and our inability or difficulty to tolerate difficult sensations. It's like our brain kind of reacts and it's like, wow, this is really hard right now. I need to disconnect to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
So we freeze, we dissociate, and then we bring the mindfulness back in to help us increase that tolerance.
Your
And
explanations
yeah,
are so helpful. Orialis, did you want to say something? Sorry.
no, I don't even know if it relates, but yeah, I was going to say, again, just how it makes sense, based on the experiences the person has gone through. It makes sense that in the past, the dissociation helped them get through those really tough times, right? And now recognizing that, what are the ways in which it's impacting my life, and sometimes it is helpful to, you know, sometimes something is so big that we can't deal with it right now. For whatever reason, our body and our brain are trying to keep us safe from, that is too
Mm-hmm.
much in this moment, right? But again, with mindfulness, it's again bringing up that tolerance for those difficult emotions and that choice of, okay, yeah, maybe in that moment or in this moment, I can't deal with this right now, right? But how can I regulate myself, ground myself, to a place of feeling safer, and then slowly I can start to, face whatever these uncomfortable things are. So that's just something that, again, through that overarching journey, that you can use mindfulness to kind of help you be able to sit with those things more.
I
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the non-judgment again because a lot of shame can be attached to like flight, with freeze, with dissociating, the not being present. There's so much judgment and shame. So like reminding ourselves that this really is our brain making snap automatic decisions and doing the best it can in the moment to protect ourselves. And sometimes we really do need to avoid. Sometimes we really do need to disconnect. And doing that to certain extents, it's really important and then kindly, caringly increasing our ability to tolerate the difficult stuff and just building up that practice.
I love that. Yeah, I was about to bring up the same thing of a lot of times when we talk about things like disassociation, it has that negative connotation. But I appreciate, again, it's acknowledging that this is my body protecting itself. And then also that choice piece of it is so important for survivors of trauma specifically, right? Because when we talk about things like sexual violence, it's all about, power and control. And so they feel powerless or could feel powerless. And bringing in that aspect of choice could help increase the empowerment, bringing back power and having back that control over ourselves and situations. So I think that that's such an important piece to it. I've been hinting at it a lot, so I wanted to finally ask you, Jordan, what is the connection between mindfulness and yoga specifically?
I think my first thought to that is like they're kind of the same. Like it's yoga is there's so many things. Yoga is increasing our awareness of what's happening right now with our bodies, with our emotions, with our thoughts as we're doing like physical movement. Um, Yoga is increasing our ability to handle discomfort. Yoga is giving us the ability and helping us learn to discern between pain and discomfort. First on the mat with physical stuff, like, oh, this is a new pose. It feels really weird. Is this weird bad, like painful, or weird just new? And then you're using mindfulness to pay attention on purpose and be aware.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that you brought up just like that word again, awareness and acknowledgement. So I wanted to check and see, how does mindfulness and or yoga contribute to mental health care and the therapeutic experience? And then as a trauma-informed mental health professional and yoga instructor, how would you say yoga helps survivors of sexual assault? Do you have any specific yoga classes or moves, those kinds of things? Kind of a really big question here, but really just kind of the connection between mindfulness yoga and mental health, as well as for survivors of sexual assault.
Yeah, well, I'm super biased. I think they're all important, obviously. As someone who takes yoga classes, who teaches, and as a mental health counselor, I think they're all important, but I don't think they all have to happen together. Um, so I think that's that part. And then the other part, your other question was, what type of yoga or what yoga moves could be helpful for survivors. I think going back to what I said before, just kind of increasing or improving your discernment muscle. Like, is this painful? Is this like not healthy for my body? Or is this new and uncomfortable? Can I stay here a little longer? That can be helpful. And then we have to think about, triggers, and that's really important too. So, something to keep in mind, there are different types of yoga, and there are some yoga classes that are really slow where you hold resting poses for long periods of time. So like for those who might be familiar with yoga, like staying in pigeon for a long period of time, or staying in frog or child pose for a really long, for like 3 to 5 minutes, that could be really triggering, and maybe even increase the likelihood that someone might dissociate because you're really bringing your body into this like state of rest. Your mind might kind of wander, and you might be like, you might just feel really uncomfortable, and that discomfort might kind of trigger this need to disconnect. So I think classes that are really helpful are those that have a lot of movement, like a flow class or even a power yoga class where you're just kind of constantly moving, and that just kind of keeps your mind focused on the moment. Like, what am I doing next? What did the teacher say? That's really helpful. And then I'm not sure if I missed part of your question.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. Actually, I have a follow-up question, Jordan.
Yeah.
Are there trauma-informed yoga classes?
Yeah, so I think there are. I personally am not aware of them, but I think just a Google search will bring it up. And I've actually seen trauma-informed yoga trainings for teachers like come up on Facebook actually. So on both ends, you can be trained to be a trauma-informed yoga teacher, and there are classes you can go to. Also, just because, access might be an issue, I think just kind of increasing our own ability to advocate for ourselves into kind of like I was saying before, like giving your own counselor feedback. Like if you go to a yoga class where you're constantly feeling triggered, the teacher's using words that makes it really uncomfortable, whatever it might be, letting yourself know, like, I don't have to go to this yoga studio, I can go to another one, or maybe talk to the teacher and just, let them know, because I'm hoping that, they're like the people I work with, where they want to know how the students are doing, they want to know what kind of effect they're having, and they're open to changing the words or being more mindful of who's attending.
Got it. I appreciate that. And the other piece of the question, and you, Orialis, or you, Jordan, can jump in on it, is, and we've been kind of talking a lot about it during this podcast, but I didn't know if you had any specific things you wanted to bring up in regards to how mindfulness or yoga can help specifically survivors of sexual violence.
Yeah, I think most of what we've already spoken to, speaks to that about, increasing like self-compassion for ourselves, increasing like awareness of, our thoughts, expectations, what's sort of driving us, and increasing our ability to choose. I think overarching, it's just getting to know yourself, better, and having more compassion for yourself, and understanding why we do the things that we do, our motivations. Um, and I think in getting to know ourselves better, it's, again, a lot of times when we're living in that survival self-protective mode, we're doing everything to keep ourselves safe, right? But I also think an important conversation with mindfulness to also have with our our counselors, our friends, whoever, ourselves, is about what are our values, what's important, what's important to me, what do I want my life, to look like, and in gaining more of that choice back, right, of how can I now make decisions, or how can I respond, right, instead of reacting, but how can I respond in ways that, bring me closer to the values that I hold, as opposed to, just automatic sort of, self-protective reaction in the moment. So I hope that that's like a direction, that mindfulness can help survivors.
Yeah. I think mindfulness or yoga or both, they're vehicles to get you where you want to go. Like those yoga and mindfulness aren't the end, but they're the vehicle to take you where you want to go, to give you that choice, to give you that freedom, to increase your ability to tolerate difficult things, to increase your reaction time, and to help you respond instead of react.
Yeah. I kind of always like something that I find myself bringing up a lot, is talking to my clients and also reminding myself that, sort of a meaningful life is one in which we experience all emotions, right?
Mm.
Not just like the quote unquote happy or positive ones. So again, it's just recognizing that sometimes, things happen and we're going to feel sad, or sometimes, somebody says something and we're going to feel hurt. That is something that is always going to come up. Like, we're going to have so many opportunities throughout our life, to practice mindfulness. But again, it's just helping you just be more aware of, again, not trying to like specifically like maybe get rid of, certain uncomfortable feelings or thoughts.
Yeah, I love that you said that, Orialis. It's so important. I think it relates to so many things we've been talking about, that we're not throwing out emotions we don't like. We're increasing our ability to feel the uncomfortable and the comfortable ones. Like the comfortable ones are what Orialis just said, like like happy, positive, calm, relaxed, and uncomfortable is sad, angry, hurt. And we're increasing our ability to sit with that, to figure out what these emotions are telling us, because emotions are signals, and we are not our emotions. Emotions are telling us what we need, and to figure out what's under the emotion, what's under the thought, what do I need, and then using self-compassion and self-care with all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Getting to know your needs better.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love that you described emotions that way. And it just sounds like mindfulness can be a vehicle to living more authentically and being our true authentic selves as well, because of that non-judgmental piece. And I love that you brought up, Aurealis, that to live, a full life, you do have to experience the full range of those signals that we were talking about. Um, Going off of that, I think we can, collectively, I think current events and media could make people more stressed out or disassociate. So we talked a little bit about it, but I didn't know if you wanted to bring up how mindfulness could help with, current stressors or things like that. And if it can, how could it help?
Yeah, I think first awareness that, the current medical, political, social climate is having an effect on us, which I'm pretty sure it's having an effect on all of us. So I think just the awareness first, and then noticing like how, like, are we more tense throughout the day? Like Oriella said, are we getting more like tension headaches? Um, or are we feeling more depressed or irritable throughout the day? Just kind of noticing that first. And then self-care, honestly, I think self-care and self-compassion, like we are humans going through a pandemic, like that doesn't happen very often. It's not like we're trained for that. So it's natural to feel worse in different ways, and just to apply self-compassion and self-care, doing the things that give us comfort, help us soothe, that bring us a little joy.
Yeah. Not judging ourselves for, like Jordan said, like for struggling at times, because, of course, our bodies throughout this process may be in that, survival response. Right. So I think also bringing in that non-judgment of like struggling, um, and I think also being able to, with that awareness and noticing that we're struggling, of maybe having some conversations with ourselves about like, what do we need? Like, do I need to maybe hop off of social media for a little bit? Do I need to, limit how much time I'm spending, looking at checking in with the news every day? Do I need some connection, so being more intentional of reaching out to others. So again, just getting to know ourselves better and thinking about like, what do we need, what would be helpful, for us to get through this.
I love that. Yeah, I appreciate you both kind of bringing up those comments, and yeah, I think that definitely relatable, and kind of again learning what we need is so important. Speaking, just kind of as a final question for anyone who's listening, who might be a beginner or established practitioner, what are some resources that you would recommend that they can use to help build on their practice of mindfulness? And this could be, books, podcasts, videos, anything that you would recommend for people to learn more about it?
I always think like a way of, I guess, like a simple way of maybe trying to start practicing could be through apps. You can always download different, there's the ones that we think about like Calm and, Headspace that are, again, meditation apps, but they do have mindfulness practices. Insight Timer is a free one that has like thousands of mindfulness exercises on there.
Yeah, I can't. So I'm glad you brought up the apps because I couldn't think of apps specifically. I was thinking more of resources I go to that are mindfulness related and like self-care related, and also increasing self-awareness. So Brene Brown, I think I talk about her a lot. She's one of my favorites. She's a social worker and storyteller for those who aren't familiar. And she has books and a couple of podcasts, Unlocking Us, available on the podcast app or on Spotify, is so great and has so many different topics that are really relatable, especially to what we're going through right now. And then a professor from our university, she goes by Dr. Shana on Instagram. She has really great stuff on Instagram that's related to like mindfulness and self-care. I think it's pretty accessible and it's also free and it's just really like cute, fun, and relatable.
I love that. Thank you so much for all of those great suggestions. I love that there's apps as well as podcasts and Instagram accounts, because I think a majority of our listeners probably use all those things. So I think that those are really awesome. So I think that's a wonderful place to sign off personally. But is there anything else you or Jordan and you or Orialis want to bring up before we sign off here?
I feel like I always say this, and maybe I said this during the last one too, but I can't stress enough, again, just being patient, with yourself, being understanding of wherever you are in your journey. And again, that sometimes it's okay or it's natural to take some steps forward, maybe you, again, are practicing this, it's going really well, and then maybe you need to take a pause, throughout your journey. So just being patient with yourself, being compassionate with yourself of wherever you are in your journey. And then hopefully, finding somebody, whether that's a professional or friend, just somebody that you can, process these things with throughout as well, can be really helpful.
Yeah. What comes up for me is acknowledge and allow, which, funnily enough, you had brought up, Emily, and I'm surprised I didn't say it first, but those are like probably two of my most favorite words that my own therapist said to me, and I remind myself all the time, like acknowledge what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, and allow myself to feel it with like self-compassion and kindness, like underneath that. We are, especially right now, we're going through a really hard time that most of us in our like living, who are alive have not gone through it. And then even without the pandemic as like a backdrop, that we are human beings, we're imperfect, and life's really hard and we're not, trained for this. So acknowledge that you're feeling something, allow yourself to do it, self-soothe, and, pick up, take a step back, and keep going.
I love those words. I feel like they're my favorite words now.
Yeah.
So I want to I think that's a great place to sign off. So I want to thank the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. So to learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so much, Jordan and Orialis, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.